Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
James Walker here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannisen from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Roy Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Shaw, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Matt Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
You have nearly made it through one of the craziest fantasy football years of all time. Hello, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. One round left of fantasy footy to go. If you play for leagues, it is your grand final week. Those in a rankings charge, you've got just a 9-game left to be able to make your way into the best possible ranking that you can. To have another quick chat with me as we do our last really focused 2020 podcast of the year. I've got Kane. Hello, mate.
Hello, MJ.
There is a lot to get through. Like, I know there's only, 9 games of fantasy footy left for the year, but there is still so much that we need to talk about. We will get to the Sam Doherty dilemma in just a moment. We're going to look at the fixture matchups to help you out and a bunch of other stuff. But I think right out of the gate, Kane, let's talk drafts, which is one of the very much improving fantasy outputs across the landscape. If I was to actually speak English for a second, really, it's the format and the style that people are more and more every year loving to play and to pick up. And when it comes to your grand final, depending on the league settings you have, you probably have a rolling lockout. In Ultimate Footy, that's certainly what we've encouraged as a coaches panel for commissioners to set up, is a rolling lockout. And if you play it right and smart with a strategy, you can catch up if you're behind, or you can set up a real dominant lead.
Yeah, well, I think especially, MJ, this year with teams only coming out 24 hours before the game, there's a lot of people that are assuming players have been named. I think the guy last week that was really popular was Ben Ainsworth.
Yeah.
A guy that you're banking on being in your side. By the time we knew that Ben Ainsworth was ill and wasn't playing, pretty much every team was locked out, bar the actual Suns and the Pirates. There was no whispers at all. So the thing I'm finding a lot of really smart coaches doing, and we know in draft, especially when you have a rolling lockout, loopholing is incredibly important. You can bank anywhere between 50 and 100 points by getting your loopholes right. And what I saw a lot of smart coaches doing last week was picking up Gold Coast and Collingwood players because they played at the end of the round and using them as their loophole. And the advantage of doing that last week was, if you had it just say Shannon Hearn and you liked his, 64-point score, you can take that. He's the type of player that, depending on the week this year, can hover anywhere between 40 and 80. That's sort of his range. And the 64, it's a very solid backline score to get you started. The advantage of having those players who play at the end of the round is, if you're losing your head-to-head matchup and a 64 won't cut it, you can all of a sudden, at the very death, trade out that, again, last week it was Collingwood and Gold Coast, and just pick up someone off the waiver wire who's another defender and just hope that maybe they pop and they get you that extra 10 points. So if you set yourself up right and have a player in each line, you can have the best of both worlds. You can have a look at your emergency score, and you can also have a crack at catching up if that point isn't enough by the very end of the week. And a lot of times, the opposition you might be playing might not have any players left, so you know the exact amount of points you need or don't need to get the job done. And I think there's a lot of people playing it that way just to maximise every single point, because we know in draft in particular, MJ, it can come down to single-digit scores more often than not.
It can be really, really close, and the opportunity in terms of how you want to play that is probably those first 2 or 3 games of the round, maximising those players that you think you're like, if they pop, I'll take it. If they don't, I might be able to bench or field something over the top of it. And then you've got those late options. So in terms of some options that might be people in drafts that we could look at for the late end of the round, the most obvious is the Monday night clash. It's Collingwood and Port Adelaide. Who are the guys that might be on our waiver wire that the non-playing guys are pretty easy to get? And I want to talk about keeper strategy in a second about, people might be dropping some valuable commodities into the waiver wire pool for you to go and pick up. But who are the guys that might be worth a flyer selection from Port Adelaide and Collingwood to jag that 70, 80, 90 points to win you your premiership this year? Are there any guys that are sitting in the waiver pool that you go, look, there could be something with this guy?
Yeah, well, there's a few that jump out to me. We'll start with Port down back, because I think that's where probably the most value is. And again, we know that defenders against Collingwood are just having a field day. It's just the way they set up. There's usually a lot of ball back there, and they allow the opposition to possess it in their back half without pressing really hard on the receiver. So a guy that's always in the waiver pool, MJ, he's just a regular guy, but he has the ability to go big, and he's coming off a 77-point score last week, is Riley Bonner. When he's in that side, he has that ability, and he is the type of guy that, and again, you're bringing these guys on, MJ, because you need something to happen. You know, you're bringing these guys on because, you know, you need a 70 out of the blue to get the job done, and he is a guy that can do that. Trent McKenzie's probably another one. He's probably more likely to be owned than Riley Bonner, I would say, just because he's a consistent feature in the team. But he has that ability, especially with the kickouts. Any of those kick-out guys, if there's a run of behinds, these guys can get, 12 to 15 points just from that. And we know in this condensed game time, that's extremely valuable. So I really like him. Again, selection is going to be interesting for the Power because there's nothing to be gained from them winning or losing.
No.
Yeah. So, again, it's impossible to predict at this time of the week. But, do you give a Charlie Dixon a rest and it brings, a Todd Marshall into the game?
Yeah.
Does it bring these type of guys into a game? And again, another one that's just has that X factor ability is a Stevie Motlop or a Kane Farrell. These type of guys that, when it goes their way, they can go big. Again, these are not the guys, and they're in the waiver pool for a reason. They're not consistent scorers, but they're guys that, as I said, if you get to the last game of the year and you realize that you need a 70-point score to get it done, you've got to have a swing and take one of these guys and hope it happens. And I think those guys have that potential. On the Collingwood end, to be honest, depending on the week, if you look at some of the scores that their players, again, starting in defence, can put out. Yeah. Last week against the Suns, Isaac Quainer was 70+. Again, depending on the league, especially if you keep, he's probably not as likely to be available. But again, in his last 4 games, Jack Magsden has 2 70+ scores. Yeah. Like, there's just guys that can pop, especially in Collingwood. We've seen it time to time. They can possess the footy, and they can possess it a lot in that backline area. Jamie Elliott's another one. Again, he's had probably a 2 good last 3 games. He's got 103, 60, and then a 69 in his last 3. So on form, he's probably a guy that would probably be picked up. Yeah. And the other one I always seem to like is Will Hoskin-Elliott. Again, another guy that's right on the fringe of being in the waiver pool every week, but he has that ability for sure. Yeah,
there are some really good options for us through there, and those little 20, 30, 40-point moves can really make a difference in those crucial head-to-head matchups. On the reverse, and maybe it's more a keeper league strategy, and it definitely is as coaches do look to try to bring players in, whether it be a certain player has missed out because they're a surprise omission, i.e. a Ben Ainsworth, or they're trying to maximise that bench score and roster a player that's not playing. We might see some keeper coaches, and to be fair, in a grand final, I'd understand the strategy of whatever I need to drop into the player pool to be able to get those points on field for the chance to win a premiership. I understand why you'd do that. Totally get why you're doing that. So not saying you shouldn't do that. However, for coaches out of the grand final, we could get some gems that just happen to fall in the waiver wire. Because let's be honest, if you're not in the grand final in drafts, most people's mindsets have started to move away from fantasy footy. They're probably not even listening to this podcast, and that's okay. But there could be some guys that we just see appear on the waiver wire that are well worth paying attention to on Tuesday morning.
Yeah, for sure, especially in keepers, MJ, because we know, obviously in single-season draft, if they're not playing this week, they're worthless too. What we often see this time of year is it's the kids. Yeah. Especially if you're in a league with a rookie list, there will be players in the grand final that just want to maximise every avenue to win that game. And like you said, I totally get it. Yep. But it does mean you will see some names that have no right to be on the waiver wire be dropped down. Yeah. Harry Schonberg was one that I saw in a couple leagues. And again, funnily enough, he was terrific on field this week, which makes it even more painful because he was not lasting more than an hour on that waiver wire once people saw. And that's the thing with the rolling lockouts and the rolling, waiver wire is that you can pick up and drop players straight away. There's some leagues that will have him, that he drops to become a restricted free agent and you can put a bid in for him. But a lot of leagues, it's just pick up and play because teams are so on the fly that you have to have that availability to make the game, fair for everyone to even field a team. So I'd be keeping an eye out on him.
Yeah.
Again, even at guys like, Finn McGuinness that was probably drafted initially in a redraft, making his way down just because people need bodies. So again, you'll be surprised what comes onto the waiver wire. So as I said, even if you're not in the grand final, just keep an eye out, especially for the teams. Have a look at their team and just see, what could be coming. And certainly look when that matchup's been played, again, when they're likely to make that move to drop a player.
All right, there you go. Hopefully that's going to help you with your draft leagues. Let's talk probably the biggest dilemma for coaches that do still have a trade in Dream Team and SuperCoach, and that is Sam Doherty. Wow. I'm surprised that Carlton even played him. I know that finals were a chance, but I'm still surprised they kind of played him. Injury with his calf inside that first quarter. He's now done for the year. I can't see a world that they would risk further injury to him, even if he was semi-right to go. So I think it's a forced trade for us, potentially, in Dream Team and SuperCoach, while AFL Fantasy, it's an obvious move to make him. But there is some merit, Kane, before we look at the trade replacements. We do, depending on who's on your side, you do have the chance to get a sneaky look at whether or not you have to trade at all.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Last week, Trent Rivers was the guy that bailed a lot of coaches out. And honestly, I think a lot of people thought with the score that Rivers dished up, can Doherty do any better based on the form he was in? So there was a lot of people that just said, I'm just going to take this, 100-plus score in SuperCoach, and this 60, 70-plus score in Dream Team and think, well, what's 76? Hard for Doherty to sort of beat that in his current form. And then, again, you had people that fielded Doherty and all of a sudden you're down 65 points and 100 points across the formats. And to be honest, it was just such an embarrassing incident for the Blues, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Again, with the cloud that was over him in the week, they didn't even put him on their injury report, which, had a lot of people thinking, how legit is this injury? And then to barely make it through a quarter of the game and to have this score, But yeah, you've got to take the opportunity to have a look at a Rivers if you've got him, MJ, because again, people are down to, well, if they've got more than two trades, it doesn't make any sense because you can't even use them all.
Yeah.
So people are down to either none, or if you do have one or two, have a look at this at Rivers, because if he scores a 60-plus score, where are you going to from Doherty where you're going to net much more than that? I know people, Caleb Daniels scored, 120 plus.
Yeah, but that was
it's
against
not happening
Hawthorn.
again. And let's be honest, MJ, that's not a great matchup to play Freo. If
No.
anyone's seen Kazali Stadium
Nope.
and the conditions that have been played in up there, it's
Slippery.
not conducive to a high mark game. Maybe Daniel could get 30 points from taking the kickouts because it's really tricky up there. But let's be honest, that was a score.
That's one in a
if
year
we played
score.
a full game, that is his career best score.
By a long way.
That's a 160. That just doesn't happen every week. So I think you're chasing the car a little bit there if you bring Caleb Daniel in. So I don't see you're going to gain many points by doing a move like that. And I'd probably have the line at about 60. If Rivers gets 60, or if you've got another player that is going to play before that Blues game, I look at Adelaide being available.
Yeah.
Lockie Scholl was a player that a lot of people lucked into a really good score from him last week. So if you've got those two guys, you'd be crazy not to have a look before you pull the trigger on Doherty. And again, I know you're ruling out some options by doing that. You're ruling out North and West Coast players. You're ruling out Saints and Giants. You're ruling out D's and Bombers and Tigers and Crows. But there's still some options later in the week. So
really good matchups.
I'd be, especially in the form that Rivers is in, MJ, and it's a matchup with Essendon. It's far from a matchup
that's
where
difficult.
You think they're going to be starved at the ball. It's not the Cats.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'd be looking at thinking, if I can get a 60, I reckon I can find more than 20 points, available there. And I guess if you do have two trades left, you've got an opportunity now. If you don't have a completed side, you could drop Sam Doherty down to a bargain basement player who's not going to play to loophole Rivers' score.
Yeah.
And then take a rookie up. So you've got some flexibility there. So I would pump the brakes and just use your emergencies as much as you can, because that's the whole purpose of the trade. The purpose of the trade is to get more points. It's not just to go premium to premium because you want a premium. It's to get maximum points. So, again, use your Rivers, use your Scholes, whoever you've got on the bench that's going to play before Doherty.
Perez, whatever,
If the score's no good, again, absolutely move him on. But
Totally.
give yourself a chance to get points that way. And then maybe it opens up the option to go sideways somewhere else because, if we touch on a guy like Lachie Neale, again, who was tagged last week and he's about to walk into Ed Curnow. Last year, Lachie Neale had a game against, and it was a great game for the Blues. It was probably one of the best games I've seen ever from a player, and Patrick Cripps took the Lions to town. But Lachie Neale was on 90 points at halftime last year against the Blues.
Yeah.
Ed Curnow kept him to 14 in the second half.
Wow.
So I'd have to think, at Lachie Neale's price, when you can have a pick of the litter of any other midfielder, I reckon you can almost find another midfielder to get you more than 20 points from Lachie Neale this week. So, again, use that bench, save that trade. I know it probably didn't work out this week when people wanted to trade Sam Doherty and trade Jai Simpkins, but I think in this specific scenario, when you've got good cover, let them go to work and then see what happens from there.
Yeah, I think it's some really good advice. And knowing that if you are going to make those premium to premium trades because you're trying to avoid a tag in the Lachie Neale instance, also know there's risk associated with that trade. There is every chance that Ed Curnow does not tag and that Neale goes and runs amok like he has.
Absolutely.
For most of to be fair, he's not in the greatest of form anyway at the moment, barring probably 2 weeks ago in the Q Clash. Outside of that, he's kind of been out of form in contrast to what he did to the early year. So there's a risk that, you hold Curnow, having Neale down to a 20, 30 points below his average. There's every chance of that. And coaches that captained him this week, they know the pain of the tag. On the other side of it, he could just, Carlton go, what, our year is done. We're just going to experiment. We're going to try some different things. We're going to put some kids in different roles and different stuff. And Neale just gets free ball and gets another 150 in SuperCoach and a 120 in DreamTeam and AFL Fantasy. It's equally as likely. And the matchups and team selection should give you a level of indication.
Yeah, absolutely, MJ. That's the thing. You're going to have to make a decision. And especially if you're in a league grand final.
Yeah.
Again, you've got to take some hard looks at your team. And again, ideally in every scenario, you want to wait. You don't want to be making a rash move if you can wait and actually see that, hey, I'm actually the one that's in the box seat here. Let them make,
the crazy move.
The crazy move and try to catch me. So you always want to be patient and give your players a chance just to see what you have to do. Again, we had someone send a message into us over the weekend that said, I forgot to make a trade I was meant to make. My only chance to win this game is to trade Lachie Neale because he's my opponent's captain. What do I do? The person ended up trading Lachie Neale to Scott Pendlebury.
Oh, nice.
The other guy kept Lachie Neale as their captain. And all of a sudden, a matchup that they were bound to lose, Lachie Neale scored in the 50s. That person had Max Gawn as the vice captain. 200-point swing later.
Yeah.
They won the game by 10 points.
Come on.
But if that's the situation you're in, don't just concede because Lachie Neale's a great player. Again, just make a move and hope that it goes your way. And again, for that guy to be in a cash league grand final trading Lachie Neale, even though it probably made little sense. Again, I don't think anyone thought Ryan Clark would do that good of a job on him.
Yeah.
But hey, you were set to lose if you kept it with Lachie Neale in your side. So again, all the rules go out the window when we're talking about 1 week of footy. Literally anything can happen. We're not asking for 17 weeks of good scoring.
Nope.
We're asking what can they do in this 1 week. We said last week, Tom Rockcliffe is the biggest no-brainer if you can get him.
Yeah, especially.
Against Essendon, Port Adelaide just looking to lock things away. He's always going to play big minutes, which is at the start of the year his scoring was not at the level we expect because he was barely on the ground.
Yeah.
Now it's Travis Boak getting that rest, keeping the minutes in the 70%. Tom Rockcliffe's up at 90%. Of course he's going to score well.
Yeah.
And he's not a player that they're going to rest. Again, no offense to Tom, but he's not as important as a Boak, as a Dixon. If anyone's going to get managed in-game, it's going to be them. It's not going to be a Tom Rockcliffe who's just a workhorse and finds the ball at will. So, again, you just need 1 week. You just need to catch lightning in a bottle for 1 week. And that's where MJ, on the flip side, the Tarantos of the world,
oh my gosh,
the Simpkins, obviously the Doherty injury.
Mitchell.
Tom Mitchell. That was just... Again, that's where it just absolutely kills you. So, again, you can't have any fear in these weeks.
No.
Again, if you think that's the matchup, do it. But as I said earlier, give yourself the best chance to use your bench because you might get a pleasant surprise. Sam Wicks had 64 on the weekend, and he outscored Taranto by 20 points.
Yeah.
So, again, anything can happen when it's a one-game sample size.
Would you be tempted to use some draft strategy that we talked about at the front where we're loopholing certain players or attempting to play the loopholes? Is that something you'd look at doing early on in the round for our fantasy formats as well? We've got North Melbourne, West Coast, St Kilda and Giants, the Thursday, Friday games. At least by then we'll have some visibility on what the Saturday squads look like. And we've got the 3 games rolling through there before the next 3 on Sunday, the 1 on the Monday. Is that something you'd consider looking at, taking a Simpkin, or gosh, it feels wrong, even a Goldstein? Because I don't like the Draper matchup. If you were trying to loophole against him, I don't like the Goldie matchup either against Nick Nat. But is that something we should be looking at, or is that not quite the aggressive part of the strategies to consider?
Well, that's the really hard thing with a guy like Simpkin is that he does play that first game of the round. So you've got a couple of things that, give me some cause for concern. By that point, you've got visibility on one other team sheet. You've got visibility on the Saints and the Giants.
Yeah.
I think the Giants is a good one to have visibility on because we know they dropped the captain last week.
Yeah, and no one's safe now.
But then on the flip side, you think, how far do they take it? Because if Stephen Canelio's form wasn't good enough to be in the team, well, I'm worried about Cameron, Taranto, and a host of other players, probably outside of Lockie Whitfield, Josh Kelly, and a couple of other young guys.
Yeah.
So if that's the path they want to go down, again, no offense to the likes of, Jack Buckley playing his first game, but you can't tell me that he's a better player in that side than Stephen Canelio.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what Leon Cameron's going to do. So that's a good thing to have visibility on because there's a lot of people that jumped on Taranto, a few weeks back. There's a lot of people that have, not Lockie Whitfield's in trouble, but Lockie Whitfield and Toby Green. So, again, I'd love to put Simpkin on the bench and see what he does. Obviously, if I do that, I can't trade him. So who am I actually going to be able to trade then? If you're stuck with a Sam Sturt on the field loopholing him with and Simpkin scores a 40, well, what are you going to do? Trade Sam Sturt to
Buckley?
Any rookie that you can afford? And is that the best way then to...
Yeah.
So I think that's the really tricky part is I think it makes sense to me to put a Simpkin on the bench and peak his score.
Yeah.
I just find it really hard then to have another avenue that can outscore him, unless you've got bench cover. Maybe you've got a Riccardi on the bench. Like maybe Coleman. In that scenario, if you've got a guy like that, and then, at least you feel like if Simpkin, sucks it up again with a sub-50 score, maybe you've got an opportunity. But then you'd be kicking yourself, MJ, on the flip side, thinking, I've got enough cash to take Simpkin to Blake Acres, these type of guys. So that's where I feel like it's a really, really tricky week. And you have to be thinking to yourself, where can I net the most points? You might have to just have the gutsy call and go, you know what? I'm just going to play Trent Rivers on the field for Sam Doherty.
Yeah.
And I'm going to trade Jai Simpkin to the best player I can get because I think I can get 30 to 40 points by doing so.
Right there. Yeah.
That's the hard thing with Simpkin, though, MJ, is that he had the role. Nothing in his role was different.
No.
It's just that he wasn't touching it. And when you look at a 31 and a 45 in the last 2 weeks in DT, I don't blame people for wanting to trade Jai Simpkin. And unfortunately for North Melbourne, they're just in a horrible position. The season can't come quick enough.
Yeah.
And you're against the West Coast. I know it's not, in WA, so they're not as deadly, but, they want to finish the season as strong as they enter finals.
Well,
they're not going to
if they win, easy. And if they win and some other results go their way, West Coast can make the top 4.
Exactly, and they don't know what's going to happen down the line, so they've just got to finish strong.
Yep.
Which is horrible for a North Melbourne side. So I get the temptation to pull the trigger on that, especially, as I said, if you go, I really like that I can get to this person.
Same with Goldie. It's the same theory, isn't
agreed.
it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, especially when you're up against Nick Nat.
Yeah.
I think that, in a sense, and again, unfortunately, with the way Goldie's been going, his price is at a point now where
there's nowhere to go.
It's not as easy to get to, a Gorn, and O'Brien. Like O'Brien is playing against Richmond.
That's the matchup.
Nankervis is the type of ruckman that you can score against. He doesn't even usually contest the ruck contest in his own forward line. He sits out there to get the intercept mark. So a lot of ruckmen can just grab it out there and hack it out.
Yeah.
And get points down that avenue. Like we're talking in genuinely $200,000 in Dream Team to get to Riley O'Brien.
I don't know if people have that. And again, it might be the last trade you have. And so to use that at the start of the round is dangerous. Look, if you are looking for like for sake of a better term, a money ball ruck that you could afford from Goldie, and maybe it's recency bias, but I actually like Paddy Ryder against a GWS roulette of rucks.
And we saw the way that Mumford plays. The only way Mumford was going to stop Gawn scoring was by trying to punch him in the back of the head, which he did on multiple occasions. And I think the Saints, I know that's clearly a game that it's all on the line.
Yes.
St Kilda's lost some really winnable games that they had really strong claims on. West Coast, Melbourne, they could have really locked it up.
Yeah.
And I think they just come out and absolutely put the Giants to the sword. I think that's a great type of guy because their backline's not super strong at the moment, the Giants. No Phil Davis. And like you said, Paddy Ryder's the type of guy. And we saw how well he actually scored against Nick Nat. He's one of the few guys in the league that he doesn't quite have the aerial ability in the ruck stuff as Nick Nat, but he's bloody close. If you want a centre bounce ruckman exclusively, outside of Nick Nat, Paddy Ryder is right in that conversation.
Absolutely.
And that's why he contests so many of them. Rowan Marshall plays forward and obviously does a lot of great work around the grounds, but I'm telling you, that ability of Paddy Ryder in the centre bounce, again, he's going to jump straight over Shane Mumford. So I think, like we said earlier, MJ, you only need one game. And I do think that he's the type of guy that, again, mobility-wise, it does really suit him to play against a guy like Mumford. And maybe they bring in Jacobs.
It'd be the same. He just as strong an option. And again, I'd only do it if it's you need you're on a limited cash budget or you're trying to get some extra dollars into the bank account for the second trade, or in AFL Fantasy, if you're taking a Goldie down to a Ryder because hopefully somewhere along the way you want to get the Doherty move up, or you've got to fix a failed stepping stone forward, or you're just sick of a certain player and you want to go get a certain guy. So those are the sort of moves I'd be doing. If we were to look kind of matchup by matchup for a second, who are the guys that either across formats, definitely from a draft perspective, might be guys to look at? Who is one or two player from each side in each matchup that you go, I'd love some shares on this player today, this matchup. I think that there's something there because, like, if we look Thursday night between West Coast and North Melbourne, I feel like if I had a West Coast forward especially, or a West Coast defender, I'd be feeling pretty excited about the potential scoring.
Yeah, I think you'd have to agree. I think the one that people are really starting to realise just how good of a player he is, and he's pushing higher up the ground to get more of the ball too, is Liam Ryan.
Yeah.
Again, he's the perfect draft type of guy because he's pushing up the ground. He's an excellent mark. I think people are starting to catch on that he's actually one of the best field kicks in the AFL. His ability to set up other players is incredible. And obviously, we know how deadly he can be in front of goal, and he's always capable of kicking 3 or 4. The other one that you just, depending on selection, is a guy like Jack Darling always has that volatility that he can just grab hold of an opposition, especially when you have to think the ball's going to be coming in thick and fast. And that is the only slight concern we do see sometimes with defenders, that when you can move the ball so quickly on a team that you're superior to, you don't really get that opportunity to chip it around.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, it's going to be down in North Melbourne's defence a lot. And that's where a Luke McDonald, if you want a guy that can separate yourself, like we've seen MJ, we reeled it off a couple of weeks ago. He had 3 120 type of scores this year in DT in a 5-game period.
Yeah.
Like, defenders just don't go that level that consistent. We spoke about Caleb Daniel doing it once this year because it's a career high game. Like, to do that often, it's dried up a little bit for McDonald, and I think that's because, again, the media has been really critical of that game style of North Melbourne. It doesn't lead to points, unfortunately. But again, even if you look at his last 3, he was an 86, a 56, and a 70. And that 56 was against Port. And Port are a very hard team to score against. They press so high. They force you just to blaze it away. They don't allow you to chip. They pressure right up, and they want you to turn it over in your defence. And unfortunately for North Melbourne, they're not quite good enough to use their skills to kick through that type of pressure at this stage. But I think against West Coast, they might get given that opportunity. So, again, if you want the volatility of a guy that can really set it up for you, I think Luke McDonald's that type of guy. And really, his floor now is 60, which is not going to kill you, MJ.
But his ceiling could win it for you, His ceiling could win it for you, but again, he is a pricey option in DT. He's over 700,000. Yeah, I don't think many people have that luxury.
He's $100 more than Andrew Gass. How do you not love? I think Andrew Gass the type of guy.
I love his matchup this week. Yeah.
If you got him as a VC, he has the ability to go 120. This is a type of game where, the queue's in the rack, and Andrew Gass on 8
He's just going to
6
jump.
minutes to go, and then he finishes on 120. And if you watch the Fremantle North Melbourne game over the weekend, and you saw Blake Acres matched up on Jared Pollock.
Yeah.
I know Andrew Gaff's a bit more high profile and commands a little bit more respect, but Pollock let Acres do as he pleases. And
Whatever
he was marking everything coming out of defence. Just working up and down the ground, and he had an absolute field day.
I don't
think it's going to be quite as easy for Acres against the Dogs in that horrible conditions of Kazali Stadium and that wind and all that sort of stuff that makes it tricky. But again, I think Gaff's the type of guy that's just such a juicy matchup.
That's the one for me.
That anything could happen.
Yeah, and it gives you that chance. If you're vice-captaining him, again, whether you've got it on in drafts or your salary cap formats, it gives you the other 8 matches to be able to really get a good look and visibility and see which players you can maximise. So I really, really like that. Look, the West Coast midfield's still going to be a little bit undermanned, but it will get some reinforcements this week. It looks like Dom Sheed's going to be right to go. Elliot Yeo won't be, but it looks like they'll get some reinforcements. So any North Melbourne midfielders outside of the ones you're usually going for, being an Anderson and a Dumont, there's probably nothing else. Luke Davies-Uniacke's a good player. I just don't know.
Still volatile, though, isn't
he? There's a
50
50-point swings every week with him at the moment. So I'd feel really nervous. As a bench option in a draft, sure, play that loophole. But I'd be really nervous to put him on the field. Let's look at the Friday night. We've already talked about Paddy Ryder. Regardless of which of the ruck roulette that GWS go for, he's got a really, really nice matchup through there. Are there any other Giants and Saints you like the looks of?
Well, in a draft format, this is a guy, again, that's always seems to be on and off waivers, but a Ben Patton. Again, he has that ability to get 6, 7, 8 marks, depending on the matchup. And he's got, a 72 as a career high this year twice. That's the type of guy. If you're getting, pretty much a 90 from a back, you're pretty comfortable with that. Again, his last 3 isn't super red hot, but it's, 54. So, again, another sort of high 60s, low 70s with the potential to go 70 plus. And I think that's a really nice platform to start on. And again, on the waivers, most weeks, obviously Jack Steele's the one that people will be thinking about. But I think you've always got to have concern, as good as he is, especially on the inside, is what is the ball going to do?
Yeah.
I still, and we've spoken about how confusing GWS selection is, GWS usage of their players. But when Matt DeBoer is sitting in the forward line, and you think about the damage he does, you cast your mind, MJ, back to round 1. And we know that he's a regular feature in your top 50 to start the year because he is that destructive
to our
the opposition players that it's just silly almost to start with a guy that plays him early in the season because you will get them cheaper and you're going to be behind the 8 ball. Think about what he did to Patrick Dangerfield. Dangerfield is one of the hardest players to tag because he's so explosive, he's so good overhead, and he has the ability to go forward and escape a tag. And he kept him restricted. We've seen what he's done to Dusty Martin in the past. We know what his resume is. We know what his resume is. Yet he sits in the half-forward flank.
Yeah, it's weird.
And I think you've got Oliver and Petrarca. Again, Petrarca probably was too explosive for him, and he was on him just in stoppages, and he burst away. But even just going to him and having him do that.
A body on the contest,
look what he did to Nat Fyfe, MJ.
Yeah.
He gave Fyfe a terrible day. So the usage of DeBoer, I know it wasn't there last week on a mid, but you've always got to have that worry in the back of your mind that he will go to someone. Yeah. And again, as good as Steele is, and we know how good of a tackler he is, that he builds his score that way. But in my mind, it's always risky, especially with so many other juicy options. Like we just spoke about Gaff. Gaff is as safe as houses this week. I just feel like most people, and again, even in a draft sense, most people have a better player, I feel like, than Steele this week, because you just don't want to get off on the foot of, a vice captain being a 50 or a 60, and now you've got the pressure on to find a captain, that can deliver. I just feel like, again, it's just probably not worth the risk in my eyes. Maybe he goes to a Brad Hill. Maybe that's the way he goes. But again, just that risk, just that risk of a Jack Steele that I just think you can find a better option this week.
Yep.
And MJ, on the Giants side,
who knows?
How do you... We
don't.
keep thinking that every week, Toby Green's back in the midfield. Again, he's back in the midfield. He barely tackled the other week. You'd think... I think he had one tackle last week against the Crows. And he was up and around the ball, but
just
again,
nothing.
That endeavour to really lay the tackles on and apply that pressure wasn't there, and they lost the game, partly because of that. The Crows were hungry around the ball, and again, if you saw the end of the Melbourne game, no one wanted to run with Ed Langdon.
Yeah.
Ed Langdon was head down, and there was 2 times in particular where Melbourne went coast to coast just because he wanted to work harder than them. So to have any faith in a Giant, again, you look at the scores last week, Taranto 44, even Whitfield, who tries his guts out, setting up play, 68. Toby Green, 68. I know Zach Williams was good, but again, he's a risk every week, not only to go down with injury, but just to have a quiet game because of role.
Yeah.
Bailey Fritsch did a defensive job in a way on Nick Haynes just by putting him in dangerous areas.
Yeah.
Kept him to 47.
Yeah.
So, again, I guess the way I'm talking, MJ, is I'm probably steering clear of most Giants just because of that volatility. Maybe the only one is Josh Kelly, just because, again, we know what his ceiling is.
Yeah.
And he's very hard to tag in that sense. But we've seen what Seb Ross can do. So there's a risk everywhere that I think...
Yeah, I want nothing to do with any GWS players.
Yeah, and I'm tipping the Saints, quite honestly. So
as you should.
I don't see the Giants being that team that I'm going to go down this week.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's move quickly to Essendon and Melbourne. I think if you don't have an Andrew Gaff, the vice-captaincy option, Maxi Gawn is always a good captaincy pick. But up against a Sam Draper, you do expect that he's going to teach the kid a little bit of a lesson along the way. And then we do have some reasonable premium options to look through. Look, I wouldn't be going after Petrarca. If you don't have him at this point in time, it's purely a defensive trade. I think you might want to try to take a risk on another forward in another line. Merritt's been good in chunks of this year. Devon Smith popped for us the other week with a ton across the formats. And then Rivers, who we've already alluded to, is that guy we can loophole for the Sam Doherty if we need it.
Yeah, I think Max Gawn, MJ, like you think about this season, lowest scores, a 73 in round 1 against West Coast. We know that was against Nick Natanui, and the Eagles, deservedly won that game quite comfortably in the end. And a 73 against the Crows.
Yeah.
When he was really battling with injury. Remember, he was barely lucky to get up.
Yeah. Shoulder and knee problems that game.
Yeah, well, he ended up missing rounds 11, 12, and 13 after it, and he's returned with scores of 83, 100, 96, and 103.
In DreamTeam Fantasy, yeah.
In DreamTeam. So if you want safe, I think he's the perfect guy as your captain. I know it's early in the round, but if you want to take a fly on the ceiling of, and again, you've got 2 games to look at there. If you want to take a fly on the ceiling of Gaff,
and then
you're gonna have a really safe, I'm going to say minimum 80 at the absolute worst coming back from Gawn. Again, obviously on the flip side, you could chase the ceiling of Gawn with the VC, and then really, depending on your matchup, at least you keep your powder dry. If you need to go out of the blue and pick a player late in the round just to hope that they put you over the edge, by all means. But, I'd be looking at my head-to-head matches. If they don't have Gawn, you've got to put the VC or C on him just to separate yourself because it's so safe.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about the Crows and the Tigers. Defenders against Richmond are generally good pickups. So Brodie Smith's been quiet over the last couple of weeks, but he's spent a lot of time down back and out of that midfield unit through there. Maybe Scholl might be there, but he played up on the wing this week. So these are the sort of guys that Scholl and Rivers are the cover for Doherty. Certainly the obvious matchup is Riley O'Brien up against Toby Nankervis that should pop pretty hard for us. Yeah,
and I've seen a lot of people trumpeting how big Rob's score was last year against the Tigers. We've got to remember
that was Soldo
the Tigers didn't have
Bolter, I think.
Yeah, it was I think it was even Marbiel Chol.
Yeah, it was. It was Chol and Bolter.
It wasn't even a ruck line,
Nah.
to be fair. So as good as Riley O'Brien was in that period of time, I think there was a lot of factors going his way. I wouldn't quite expect,
The 150.
that type of number, but
Yeah.
I think again, another really solid 80. Like if you're in a draft league and you've only got 3 or 4 options in your team to choose from each week,
Yeah.
and you want something real safe, I'd be getting aggressive on the VC if I could, knowing that I have the safety net of a Riley O'Brien to come back to. I thought Brad Crouch, for his value,
Yep.
is very, very juicy because, you can almost take us to Caleb Sarong. If people still have Canelio in their team,
Yeah.
he doesn't come back, even though I think he will. I think he's the type of guy that, Richmond's not really going to put massive attention into these guys.
No.
But I think we know with Brad that, again, he's very safe in that 70 to 90 range most
Indeed.
weeks this year. On the Richmond side, there's a lot of coaches, MJ, fed up with Basher Hooley,
Yeah.
to be honest. And I get it too. He was calling for the ball, and the ball just didn't go to him at all.
Nowhere near.
And we know in last year in particular, I know there was an incredible run at the MCG, which he doesn't have the access to this year. But again, they would go out of their way to give it to Basher.
Yeah.
And we saw how consistently good he was. So while I don't think you'd be moving away from him, you wouldn't have the confidence to bring a guy like that in if you've just seen the form against the Cats, and Richmond were, clearly the better team in that game. So he's a guy that I'm probably steering clear of. Again, Dusty has an incredible record against the Crows.
Yep.
There's always that risk, though, isn't there, that if Richmond are comfortably up going into the final term, does he just sit forward?
Take the
And
foot
again,
off.
he's always capable
He's
of scoring
dangerous
up there
too.
clearly.
Yeah.
But, is there that real desire to pump out, 100?
Yep.
A 130, 140 in SuperCoach. So, yeah, I'd probably be steering clear of a lot of plays in this game. Again, Brad Crouch for the value, just knowing how much cash people are dealing with at this time of year. I think he's a guy that will give you a solid score.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair call. It's not the juicy matchup we thought it would be 4 weeks ago, where it was, hey, get those Tigers ready for that grand final round. Like, this looks like it's going to be awesome. Crows are a much more improved side than they were a couple of weeks ago, that is for sure. Brisbane and Carlton, we've already talked about the potential Ed Curnow tag. Carlton's season is done. Brisbane are in a similar position to Port Adelaide, aren't they, as well, where there's not heaps to play for in the sense of top 2 secured. So we might see a couple of guys just get that cautiously, let's get them built into finals. So that's no inside mail. That's genuinely speculative. But we could see guys like Neil, Lyons, McCluggage, if they're carrying a bit at sore, there's no benefit right now for them to push hard in this game.
No, the only one real benefit for Lachie Neale is that it wouldn't be a bad thing to poll another 3 votes and just lock away the Brownlow medal.
Totally.
I think the ones you've always got to worry about is, let's not forget, you've still got to put 22 players on the park.
Yeah.
I think Dane Zorko's the one that is always a worry with his, the niggles he's been dealing with this year, and it's incredible how he responded in scoring when he came back. But we've seen some of the scoring he's dished up lately, MJ.
The variables. It's huge.
We know he's volatile.
Yeah.
We know how good he can be, but when you look at the last 3 weeks, 56, 124, 49.
Yeah, dream team. Yeah.
That's all over the shop, quite frankly. And
SuperCoach is similar.
SuperCoach is similar, and he's always that type of guy that gives you ups and downs, and you hope you get him when he's on the ups because he's as big as they come. But again, you couldn't be bringing a guy like him in, with what he's dealt with this year in terms of injuries. You have to think the younger guys would be fine. A guy that always jumps out that maybe affects draft is a Birchall. He's always a guy that maybe you get an extra week. But we do have this week between finals, and a lot of coaches keep talking about the continuity. They don't want to have players in and out of the side. So, again, it's always a risk playing footy that there's going to be an injury. But I feel like a lot of these teams will just, roll through. Brisbane were pushed really hard for 3 quarters
by
against
Sydney.
the Swans.
Yeah.
I'm sure they want some momentum going into finals, especially after last year where they lost 2 home finals to be bundled out. They've got an opportunity again to host a final at the Gabba, and obviously they'll host 2, whether they win or lose week 1. So I think there's a real desire to come out and just stamp themselves as, yep, we're playing good footy.
We are a legit threat.
Because if you think about it, MJ, everyone still has Geelong and Richmond, who sit below them on the ladder and can't pass them on the ladder, as the premiership favourites.
Yeah. And there's two
So I
teams
think
above them. Yeah.
Exactly, and there's two teams above them on the ladder who've played great footy all year and then deservedly are the top two teams.
Yeah.
So I think there's a desire for for Brisbane in particular to come out. Yep, we're playing good footy. We are deserving of a home final. And as I said, maybe Zorko just with what he's dealt with this year, but I think the likes of Lockie Neal, Lions, these guys want to finish really strong.
Yeah, I think so too. If we look to the Sunday games, Hawthorn and Gold Coast, the battle of the kids. We're going to see a couple of retiring premiership stars from the Hawks in Stratton and Puopolo finish off their career. But there are some options we could look at. Hugh Greenwood's been a nice forward for us all year in SuperCoach. Not unique, but he's been good. Wingard, is as volatile as they come in terms of scoring. But he's been up and down right throughout the year. Will Day, Scrimshaw, Greaves, there's some backline options for us through there. So I don't mind it if I had a Gold Coast player, I'd be excited at the potential because the Hawks are starting to redevelop their list at the moment.
You wouldn't feel, well, I don't feel super confident tipping either side in this game, MJ. I think the type of guy for a draft perspective who, it's a type of game where he can deliver a 70-plus score, and he did one last week, was Luke Bruce. He's just that type of guy that can push up the ground a little bit at times. We know how deadly he is in front of goal, and all of a sudden there's a 70-point score, and you're more than happy to put that on your pine. Again, from an actual salary cap option.
Yeah, no.
Again, I don't really see too many players in here that you feel super confident. Wingard was extremely quiet the first half.
Yeah.
But as he does, as volatile as he is year to year, he's also volatile quarter to quarter, and that's good and bad.
Yeah.
Obviously, the first half was the bad. But again, to claw your way to a 68, that's more than fine in this year that we're dealing. That's an 85.
Yeah, that's
in years past.
perfectly.
You're happy with that. Again, MJ, do you have any real confidence in Tom Mitchell?
Nope.
Pretty much every team has him. Obviously, draft's different when, as I said, you've only got a few options. You'd maybe think about a VC, but I wouldn't be feeling super confident just throwing the C on him. Just for whatever reason, it's just not the Tom Mitchell we know and love. It's not,
and it looked like he was going to be it, didn't he? Yeah, it looked like there was a 4 or 5 weeks in the middle of the year where oh, hello, here he comes. And then just for a variety of different reasons, it hasn't quite popped and worked for him just beyond that. Sydney and Geelong, who knows who's going to ruck in this game, to be honest. There could be about 8 different options. So, again, maybe a nice little fly pick for you through your draft league through there. Paddy Dangerfield could have a bit of a difficult matchup too.
Yeah, it's one of those things, MJ, isn't it? You feel like, and Sydney are really competitive.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing if you're a Sydney fan, I feel, is that
you're in the game.
It doesn't matter what the ladder says. They're always pushing, because they know that we need to get these games in, but we also need to get games in and teach these kids how to win.
Yeah.
And we want to try to beat anyone. Horse doesn't care about playing attractive footy, unattractive footy. He just wants to win games.
Yeah.
And to push to be ahead of Brisbane going into the final change. And again, obviously Brisbane ran away, the classy team they are, but they're never going to make it easy. On the flip side, we know what Geelong's game plan is. Kick, mark, possess the ball. And I feel like from a draft point of view, this is where the Mark O'Connors start coming into
Jed
teams.
Buse,
these type of guys,
Lockie
Jack
Henderson,
Henry, these type of guys that if they possess the footy, the kick, mark, all these guys that are 50-point players for much of the year
can get
when
80.
they deliver their 70s and 80s.
Yeah,
and you're absolutely laughing because again that's what they want to do. Again, the rise of Cam Guthrie this year,
good call,
is incredible, and he's a genuine captaincy type of option. Just for the fact that he doesn't get any attention.
Yeah.
And again, I know he got some attention bizarrely a few weeks ago. That was outrageous that he was the tag target from a Dylan Clark, I believe. But if you've watched how he played, he doesn't even play that much time on ground. But when he does,
he's
always pushing hard for the mark, tackles. He's the type of guy that just flies under the radar, yet fills every stats column. Again, you'd think a Mitch Duncan.
Yep.
But even he's shown this ability to really fade away in the second half. Set up some some weeks with 50 plus first half, and then finishing in the mid to high 60s, low 70s. So again, Guthrie seems to be that guy that really finishes it off. I think a Menegol is another one that he's got that ceiling about him, MJ. If you're in a draft and you have to make a decision on a captain and you're behind, you know that Menegola, again, like we spoke about before with Brisbane, like Zorko's the type of guy that will get a rest. Or if we spoke about with Port, Boak's the type of guy that will get, managed.
Yeah.
Menegol is not the type of guy at Geelong where they sit down and go,
we need to ease him into finals.
And also, they want continuity. They're going to bring back Joel Selwood,
Gary Ablett,
Gary
Rowan,
and maybe even Reece Stanley.
That's a lot of change.
That's a lot of changes, and they want to have a good game. And also, they didn't play their best footy against Richmond. They got exposed. That kick mark style broke down under that pressure. So, again, it broke down because of the pressure, but a lot of the skill execution wasn't there. So I wouldn't be surprised if they want to, really refine that, make sure they deliver on that. And I feel like it brings in all those guys. It brings in the Mark O'Connors, the Henderson. So if you're taking a flyer, that's a really strong pool of players.
Yeah, I like that. And the fact too is
selected for the Cats.
Yeah, and the fact too is they'll know whether West Coast beat North Melbourne or not, which they should, and they need to win to stay in the top four. So they're going to know a lot at that point in time. The final couple of games of the round, Fremantle, Western Bulldogs. It's going to be, if any history's to tell us anything, at Kazali Stadium, it's going to be a little bit greasy, a little bit slippery, and some of our favourite outside players might not have it as easy as they have the past couple of weeks.
I find this is a really hard one, MJ, because Fremantle are very well coached.
Yeah.
They're right up there as one of the most well coached and organised groups, and they have a very clear game plan. Very clear. And I think we're going to be talking a lot about Fremantle players in the off-season because it's just so
fantasy
juicy,
relevant.
It's so well coached, and players have just clearly embraced it.
Yeah.
Again, they played Melbourne in these horrific conditions of Kazali, and they still used the ball 20% better by foot than the Demons.
Yeah.
And as a result, they nearly had 100 more possessions. So the wet weather, they've already had a run at this stadium. They're not afraid to try it, even if it's not perfect conditions. Again, if it's really torrential and it's a bar of soap, I'm sure they'll, play that more territory type of game. But they can deprive the opposition
massively
of the ball.
Yeah.
On the flip side, we know how many big dogs the Bulldogs have.
Yeah.
The whole engine room is a genuine fantasy option. Like, there's 5 guys in there off the top of my head, Bont, McRae, Dunkley, Hunter, and Bailey Smith alone, that are genuine, elite players in their line. That's 4 premium midfielders, and obviously Bailey Smith with that forward position is super relevant. Again, I said it earlier, but I just feel Caleb Daniel
it's not the matchup
isn't the type of matchup for me.
And I'd be a little nervous with Bont this week too if Reece Conker comes back in. We've seen him play some pretty decent tag opportunities this year. And we know with the Bulldogs that they've got to win to stay in finals. They'll have a lot of visibility on what the rest of the ladder looks like at that point in time. So they're going to know what they need to execute to make finals or not. So,
the
they're
Fremantle don't care, do they, MJ?
Like,
no. They have a real momentum that we're a really improving side.
Yeah.
And again, they've got some great players.
Yeah.
And now they've got great players in every line. Finally, Matt Tabbin has been able to stay healthy for a season. And we've seen that, he's not in the Charlie Dixon, Tom Hawkins tier, but he's in that tier below. He's one of the best contested marks in the comp. He's kicked a goal in every game bar one.
Yeah.
He's just a very reliable, key forward. And they build the forward line around him. You throw in Rory Love and Jesse Hogan, and now Michael Walters has really embraced that forward role again.
Yes. We're
seeing how deadly he is. When you go to the midfield, you've got a young core of Brayshaw, Chera, and Sarong mixed in with Fife and Mundy, who are, really embracing their roles as well, especially Fife with that split. It's a type of game where I can see it going both ways. And as a result, I don't have any real confidence when I've got a pick of the litter this week taking on any of these guys.
Yeah,
because there's so many good players. I just don't see, again, obviously they're all capable of going 100 plus.
Absolutely.
And even some of them even bigger than that. But I don't really have the confidence to feel like I know exactly which one it's going to be.
All right. Well, then let's get to the final round. And by this point in time, Collingwood, Port Adelaide, if you're looking at these players, it's like we said at the top. In a draft, it's because you're trying to get a flyer and hope that you get a 70, 80, 90 that pops. and wins you the premiership. In salary caps, you're not holding a trade up to this point, are you? Because there's outside of a
unless
sideways
you really
move.
like your option, MJ.
Yeah.
Unless that was a player you wanted to pick from the outset.
Yeah.
But again, the issue you start having if you wait till this point is
you limit your options.
What's the player you're trading to?
Yeah.
So if you're trading Doherty, well, you've made
He's
that
gone.
decision days ago.
Yeah.
So that's the really tricky part for me. I think, again, Tom Rockliff's going to be really hard for a lot of coaches to resist. And I think, honestly, there's probably a pretty good reason for that. Positive for Port as well is that, Collingwood have locked away their final spot. So, obviously you want to win just because you want to win going into finals. But when you look at Tom Rockliff and you've got 300s in DT in his last 4, the last 2 being 122 each, like that's genuine ceiling. We know Collingwood's not going to put any time into opposition players, let alone a Tom Rockliff. It's going to be a Travis Boak, if anyone.
Well, and if you think about it too, look at just last night's game, 24 possessions, disposals for Ellis, 23 for Weller, 22 for Miller, 20 for Anderson and Greenwood. That is, for me, if I was a Tom Rockliff owner in any format, I'd be holding off on that captaincy in case I need it with him, because with any matchup in any week, Rocky's the kind of guy that can pop a 200 in SuperCoach. Genuinely.
Absolutely.
He can pop a 120, 130 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team at any point. And I'd be looking at that gaff, that Gorn, those juicy matchups that you've got at the front end of the round. And then if you're a Max Lynch owner, like maybe you brought him in to cash out a Draper, you've got that option to go, all right, well, I can take a Grundy, I can take a Rocky, or I can take that one that's popped at the stop. So I think that's the way I'd be looking at playing that right to the very death if leagues is your focus, let alone if you're going for the cash at the end.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you need a cheap option too, I mentioned him last week, and just because of the matchup, was Darcy Byrne-Jones.
I like it.
I just thought at that price, knowing what he's capable of scoring, again, against an Essendon team, and then we also mentioned the really juicy matchup against Collingwood, and we've said over and over how well defenders score against them.
Yeah.
I think that's an option that, I'm not asking for 100 from a guy like Byrne-Jones. I'm asking for probably, somewhere between a 70 and an 80.
Yeah.
I think that's where I said, is that really worth it if Rivers is going to give me a 60 plus anyway, and I can have a look at that. But yeah, Rockliff seems like the one. I'd be hesitant on any Collingwood players just because Port is very restrictive and they're very combative in the way they play, and they don't allow you that slow play, hold the ball possession. And again, I keep saying there's nothing to play for, but it doesn't make any sense either to go, half gas into a game like this. It's not the way they've played. If someone's not right, they won't be in the team. Maybe very late, the minutes will be managed. And all that means is, maybe a Boak plays a 70% game time instead of 76.
Yeah.
As I said, you still have to have 18 people on the field at all times. To think that everyone's going to play 60% is just not feasible. And that's where Rocky is the perfect guy for them.
Yeah.
He's a workhorse. He tackles. He does all that sort of stuff. And he's not a piece that if something happened to him, God forbid, it's not the end of the world like a Charlie Dixon.
Exactly.
So I think he's a very good option. Form's there. We know the pedigree of Tom Rockliff. It's unrivaled, really, especially late in the season. And there is a reason for that. Don't think that's just, something out of the blue. There's a reason guys like Rockliff really start humming at the end of the season.
Yeah.
Because his game style really suits that. Again, it's not always pretty. He's not always the most precise, but he shows up and he gets to a lot of contests and he tackles. And I think, again, it's going to be really attractive for a lot of people to go Rockliff.
Yeah.
Does that mean you have to go against him because you're trying to catch the pack? Maybe. But I think by this point, Rocky's probably your only real guy outside of Darcy Byrne-Jones for that really cheap Doherty replacement.
Yeah.
But I think otherwise you've probably made your move way earlier in the round, MJ, and you're just enjoying the last game of the season.
I think that, I don't know about enjoying unless you're well and truly ahead and you know that you've either won your rankings battle or you're winning it in the leagues. But look, you got 9 games left to go in your fantasy footy year. Well done to you for making it this far. It has been a challenging year to navigate your way through. And so we'll learn a lot from this year. There's still going to be some articles dropping right throughout the off-season at coachespanel.tv for our Patreons. man, you're going to get a bunch of exclusive content, especially as we do a deep dive analysis through the trade period. We look at club by clubs. There is stuff that is still going to be happening right throughout the off-season, especially for our patrons, but for everybody. At coachespanel.tv, there'll be podcasts from different members of the Coaches Panel. But, from us, thank you so much for sticking the course in 2020 so far. It has been a tough year, but you, my friends, have done incredibly well. We want to thank you for listening, for reading, for streaming, for downloading, whatever you've done with all the work from the Coaches Panel. We're so grateful for you and for the support you've given us and for what you've listened to so far in 2020. Kane, as always, mate, a pleasure, and some great work from you this season, mate.
No worries. Thanks, MJ. Great to be part of it, and just enjoying the footy season we didn't think we'd have at one point. So I think we've been really lucky. I know it hasn't gone everyone's way, but I hope people have enjoyed at least some of it.
Enjoy the final 9 games of the year, and from all of us here at the Coaches Panel, good luck in the final round. We'll definitely chat to you soon.